What would a war between the United States and Iran actually look like? Not the dramatic headlines, not the panic on social media, but the real picture on the ground, in the air and across the world. For decades, the US and Iran have been locked in a tense rivalry. They have never fought a direct, full-scale war, but they have constantly challenged each other through threats, sanctions, proxy conflicts, and military posturing. This long-standing hostility has shaped much of Middle Eastern politics and continues to influence global security today. The United States views Iran as a destabilizing force in the region. Washington accuses Tehran of backing militant groups, threatening key U.S. allies, and pushing toward nuclear weapons capability. Iran, meanwhile, sees the U.S. as an aggressive superpower, one that interferes in regional affairs, supports its rivals, and uses economic sanctions as a weapon. Despite this tension, both sides have avoided direct war. The reason is simple. The cost would be enormous, unpredictable, and potentially global. If a war were to begin, it would not start with a formal announcement. There would be no declaration, no warning to civilians. Instead, it would likely be triggered by a sudden event, an attack on U.S. forces in the region, a strike on an American ally, a confrontation at sea, or a complete collapse of diplomacy followed by military escalation. The first phase of such a conflict would move fast, very fast. The United States would likely rely on its overwhelming air and naval superiority. Precision airstrikes would target Iranian military infrastructure, missile launch sites, air defense systems, command centers, and sensitive facilities linked to Iran's strategic capabilities. U.S. aircraft and warships would dominate the skies and surrounding waters within hours. Iran's response would look very different. Tehran would avoid a direct, conventional battle with U.S. forces. Instead, it would use asymmetric tactics, ballistic missiles, drones, cyber attacks, and indirect strikes through allied groups across the region. American military bases in the Middle East would come under immediate threat, and commercial shipping would face serious risks. One of the most dangerous flashpoints would be the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow stretch of water is one of the world's most critical energy corridors. A significant portion of global oil passes through it every single day. Iran has repeatedly signaled that if it is attacked, it could disrupt traffic in this area. Even limited disruption would have massive consequences. Oil prices would surge almost instantly. Global markets would react with fear. Countries far from the Middle East would feel the economic shock within days. Actually, at that point, the conflict would no longer be regional, it would be global. Iran would also expand the battlefield beyond its own borders. Rather than fighting alone, it would rely on its regional network. Armed groups aligned with Iran could become active across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. This would stretch U.S. military resources and put immense pressure on American allies. Israel would almost certainly be drawn in. Gulf states would go on high alert. Civilian populations across the region would face increased danger, displacement, and instability. What began as a confrontation between two countries could quickly turn into a multi-front regional crisis. One important thing to understand is that a U.S. ground invasion of Iran is highly unlikely. Iran is a large country with difficult terrain and a population that would rally fiercely against foreign forces. Any invasion would require massive manpower, long-term occupation, and political commitment that few leaders are willing to make. Instead, the conflict would likely remain focused on air power, naval dominance, cyber operations, and economic pressure. This kind of war may seem less visible, but it can be just as destructive, if not more so. Cyber warfare would play a major role. Both the U.S. and Iran possess advanced cyber capabilities. Power grids, financial institutions, communication networks, and government systems could all become targets. These attacks might not make headlines like missile strikes, but their impact on daily life could be severe and long-lasting. Another key uncertainty is duration. A short, limited conflict could still spiral out of control. A prolonged war would drain resources, destabilize the Middle East, and reshape global politics for years. History shows that wars rarely stay contained once they begin. The global consequences would be unavoidable. Energy markets, international trade, diplomatic alliances, and security strategies would all be affected. Major world powers would be forced to respond even if they avoid direct military involvement. The international system would become more divided and more fragile. So why hasn't this war already happened? Because both sides understand what's at stake. The United States knows that military victory would come with heavy costs and long-term consequences. Iran knows that survival would demand enormous sacrifice. This fragile balance built on deterrence, pressure, and restraint has so far prevented direct war for now. But as tensions rise and diplomatic channels weaken, the margin for error continues to shrink. In global security, sometimes a single miscalculation is all it takes. This is why the question isn't just what a US-Iran war would look like, but whether the world can prevent it from happening at all.